If there's one thing we can consistently count on in mixed martial arts, it's weirdness. No matter what, there's always something strange, puzzling, or downright nonsensical in this completely chaotic sport. Bob Sapp has made music videos, random sports stars like James Toney and Jose Canseco have made cameos, John Oliver has feuded with Dana White, and UFC, as in Ocean, is a real trademark of the supposed Fight Island experience. As a result of all this, you might think you have seen it all, but actually, it could have been so much weirder if some plans actually came true. Hey, what's up guys, I'm Jason from MMA on Point, and these are 10 shocking things in MMA that actually almost happened. Number 10, Kurt Angle and the UFC. It's no secret that pro wrestling and MMA have a closer relationship than many diehards want to admit. Pro wrestling star Kurt Angle was incredibly close to being another chapter in that book. Before he became a WWE star, Angle was a highly decorated amateur wrestler, winning an NCAA Division I championship and, of course, that famous Olympic gold. Miraculously, that shiny medal was placed around a literal broken neck as he suffered a severe injury in months prior. At this time though, MMA was in its dark ages, so he went the pro wrestling route instead, but at the same time, MMA's popularity would rise during those years. And naturally, from his vocal fandom of the sport and respected resume in competition led many to speculate what he would have looked like inside the cage. Elite XC, the IFL, and Bellator all placed their bids, but the UFC was his target. Dana White reached a deal with Angle to appear on the 10th season of The Ultimate Fighter in subsequent 6-fight contracts. Mind you, this is the season that featured Kimbo Slice, Roy Nelson, Matt Mitrione, and Brendan Schaub, among others. So what stopped it from happening? Well, it was a failed medical exam according to Dana White, stemming from that broken neck and a huge litany of other medical issues any pro wrestling fan can tell you well about. As a result, it caused him to lose out on 2 UFC contracts. Number 9, the Pride/UFC tournament. When Zuffa bought Pride, it sent shockwaves throughout the MMA world. The two biggest brands had a colossal rivalry that was the subject of heated debate between fans until Zuffa bought Pride after they fell upon hard times. So with the Fertitta brothers owning both, it should have been smooth sailing on the crossover of those matchups. In reality though, there were far greater issues that no one knew about yet. One of the scrapped plans was a lightweight Grand Prix tournament. The best part was that it featured notable fighters from both rosters under Pride rules. This is significant not just because the rule set that they had with kicks on the ground, knees, all that kind of stuff, but also it wasn't 155. In Pride, their lightweight was 161, so some of the lighter welterweights could have come down and fought there. So this included Matt Hughes, Takanori Gomi, Gilbert Melendez, Shinya Aoki, and Diego Sanchez. There was even talk of George St. Pierre dropping down. Dates were set and promotional posters featured some of the lineup and were plastered all over Japan. It would have served as a launch pad for some of those continued blends of the organizations to settle the Pride versus UFC debates. But those well-documented issues with Pride's ties to organized crime derailed those plans. Instead of pushing forward, Zuffa just decided it was easier to just fold operations, and Pride did not operate separately as originally intended. Number 8, Hongman Choi's brain tumor. Remember what we said earlier about that relationship between MMA and pro wrestling? Well, Brock Lesnar's career is certainly one of the strongest examples. While most are familiar with his run as a UFC star and champion, his only fight outside of the promotion is the focus here. Matchmaking for the 6'3", 280-pound
Jack white boy
was a tricky balance act between putting him in a winnable fight while making sure the opponent, or at least maybe looked up to par. So K1 turned to the 7'2", 310-pound kickboxer Hongman Choi for this unenviable task. But just 10 days before the fight, the plan was suddenly scratched as Choi was denied a license by the California State Athletic Commission. Insanely, it was a pre-fight brain scan that showed a tumor on his pituitary gland that understandably disqualified him from the event. Holy shit. So in stepped another K1 vet, Min-So Kim, who took the fight on short notice and was pretty much just mauled. That same tumor got Choi excused from his mandatory South Korean military service before it was surgically removed in 2008. But of course, he fought everywhere outside of America, including that batshit crazy fight with Jose Canseco. Number 7, Mike Tyson in Pride. The crossover talk between boxing and MMA seems to be pretty much endless, and quite frankly, some of those callouts are ridiculous. Apparently, Cejudo's career isn't over in combat sports after all. But imagine the insanity that would have ensued if boxing legend Mike Tyson actually made his way into the Pride ring. Sure, K1 tried to put together a bout between him and Bob Sapp, but it was Pride president Sakiki Bar that came the closest to pulling this off. About a year after what turned out to be his last boxing fight, unless he's coming back too, Tyson had agreed to make several appearances in Japan's powerhouse promotion. The plan was to get Iron Mike in front of the biggest strikers in their top-class heavyweight division. Mark Hunt, Mirko Cro Cop, and even Fedor Emelianenko were teased. He even did promotional materials leading up to it. Now really, you can see him on stage with these people. The only catch was that these fights were under boxing rules, but something tells me that fans still would have definitely been on board. I know I would have. It's not quite known why this fell through. Felony issues certainly could have been the biggest issue overseas, but inside the US, where all three of the aforementioned fighters have competed countless times, it's just a legendary mystery with more questions than answers as to why it fell through. Number 6, UFC 1's near mutiny. Leading up to the first Ultimate Fighting Championship tournament, nobody really knew what to expect. Even Ken Shamrock, who had already fought in Pancrase by then, revealed he wasn't totally convinced that it wasn't just going to be pro wrestling until that infamous kick from Gerard Gordeau sent Taylor Tuli's tooth airborne. But the main issue is that many competitors in the tournament felt it was unfairly bent towards the event organizer Rorion Gracie and his family representative in the tournament, Royce Gracie. With all of the competitors packed into a small room, arguments erupted about the expectation of no rules as advertised versus what they would learn just a day before the event started. Specific restrictions such as not being able to wear shoes because they felt it would aid kicking too much, banning all hand wraps because they felt that would help punchers out too much, except for Art Jimerson, whose one glove they knew would actually be a disadvantage. Ken Shamrock even went as far as to accusing them of cheating.
They took away my shoes because they knew that if they could take away my balance, that Royce would have a better chance of beating me.
After all this though, Taylor Tuli was the one to break the ruckus up by quietly signing the contract in the middle of it all. Seeing this, it caused the others to follow suit, and just like that, the event went from the brink of disaster to being saved. Number 5, Joe Rogan versus Wesley Snipes. Have you ever watched a martial arts action movie and wondered what the star would look like in a real fight? Well, we were staggeringly close to seeing this just a few years ago. Passenger 57 himself, Wesley Snipes, prompted by the IRS closing on him for unpaid taxes, figured he could make some money fighting in the UFC. For real. While the promotion was unable to secure his original proposed opponent, which crazy enough was fellow action star and former kickboxer Jean-Claude Van Damme, they leaned towards commentator and comedian Joe Rogan to fill the role. Rogan, who himself competed in high-level taekwondo tournaments and was already deep into jiu-jitsu at that time, saw it as an easy opportunity as Snipes' limited experience on the ground would have been an easy hole to exploit with his BJJ brown belt. Rogan has even gone on record to say that he actually had begun training for the bout. Despite his willingness and Snipes' well-documented money problems, the fight fizzled out. Instead, Snipes served 3 years in federal prison and left Steven Seagal free to teach front kicks to the UFC roster. Number 4, the lightweight division dissolved. If you've by chance watched my recent video about the history of the UFC's lightweight division, you'll be pretty familiar with this story. There's no doubt that 155 pounds houses the highest concentration of massive star talent. I mean, can you imagine the sport without Khabib Nurmagomedov, Conor McGregor, Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson, and the plethora of other killers in the weight class? But that almost never happened after BJ Penn and Kel Uno's fight for the belt vacated by Jens Pulver went to a draw at UFC 41, and Zuffa simply decided to stop investing in what at the time was gaining no traction, so much so that they actually did away with it for a couple of years because the fan investment just wasn't there. They were plainly seen as, quote, too small, if you can actually believe that. For more than 3 years, the division wouldn't hold a title fight between 2003 following that draw and 2006 when Sean Shirk finally beat Kenny Florian for the reinstated title. And between UFC 49 and UFC 58, there were absolutely no lightweight fights at all. And after Sean Shirk and Hermes Franca both failed for PEDs in the second title fight since its return, the division was again in trouble. But thankfully, that's when BJ Penn returned from K1 and his time at 170 pounds, finally creating a flagship star to carry the division forward. Number 3, Tito versus Dana. Anybody ever wanted to punch their boss in the face? Yeah, admit it, sounds like fun, right? By the way, Anthony Walker has assured me that in writing this script, he is incredibly fearful of my fighting ability and would never dare to sacrifice his health in this way. Moving on, former UFC light heavyweight champion Tito Ortiz almost lived this out against his boss Dana White. The crazy hot and cold relationship between their star fighter and his former manager turned horrible boss led Ortiz to asking for a strange clause in a newly inked deal: fight Dana White in an exhibition boxing match. White, who was heavily involved in the boxing world before discovering MMA, felt confident enough in his hands to welcome the chance to quote fuck him up and make him look stupid. There was even a Spike TV special dedicated to the balancing act between White's grueling training schedule and his duties as UFC president. For better or for worse, the Nevada State Athletic Commission got involved, and a vague dispute about money led to the whole thing unraveling, with Ortiz literally no-showing the weigh-ins. Apparently this didn't stop them though, as they had a fist fight on a plane that Lorenzo Fertitta had to break up himself, but sadly there is no video of that incident.
You had a full-on fight on a private plane during takeoff.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going with you anywhere.
Number 2, the UFC with shin guards and headgear. The sport's early days involved a lot of political backlash and objections from moral watchdog groups about the visceral nature of the action. So when the controversial organization wanted to set up shop in Buffalo, New York for UFC 12, the state decided that they wanted them gone and wanted to make things as difficult as possible. The main hurdle thrown at the promotion was a new set of rules that was all just basically bullshit to get rid of them. The new rulebook, which apparently topped hundreds of pages, mandated headgear, shin guards, boxing gloves, banned head kicks, chokeholds, ground and pound, and no strikes with elbows or knees.
That's the best bit.
As a final fuck you, the rules also required an octagon that was at least 40 feet in diameter. With the show already set to go with their 32-foot cage, it would have been near impossible to build one in that amount of time. We're talking less than 24 hours notice here. While it still would have been tempting for the cash-strapped company to beg for mercy with the cage size and make it some sort of watered-down event, the decision was made to move UFC 12 to beautiful Dothan, Alabama on a day's notice. Seriously though, can you imagine watching a UFC pay-per-view where Justin Gaethje had to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov in headgear and shin guards and no ground game? Jeez. Number 1, an alligator moat. Let's file this one under one of the worst ideas of all time. When the original creators of the UFC were putting together that inaugural event, they knew it was necessary to visually separate themselves from other combat sports, and also very importantly from scripted events like pro wrestling. So with a traditional ring out of the question, they brainstormed several ideas, including using an electrified fence to enclose the fighting area. But by far the craziest idea was to surround the canvas with a moat. Yes, a literal ditch filled with water. But that's not the craziest part. Someone suggested that the moat be filled with alligators and sharks.
Hordian was talking about a moat. A moat? What do you do with a fucking moat? And I kept saying, well, we don't have to put alligators in. Ha 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 ha. Brazilian humor.
If politicians and more watchdogs were up in arms about groin shots and headbutts, imagine the shitstorm that would have brewed if wild predators were added to the quote-unquote human cockfighting shit show. Fortunately, as Rorion Gracie realized, a fighter could have, been violently consumed alive if they fell or were pushed in, makes the octagon look completely tame and unremarkable in comparison. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Anthony Walker for helping me write this list. Don't worry, buddy, I won't hurt you. You can follow him on Twitter at AntWalkerMMA. And then the video editor of this list, Max Randall, you can follow him on Twitter at Max_Randall. Thanks for watching my list, guys. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and like. We upload at least 3 videos per week about MMA, and it really helps us out when you do so. If I missed anything on this vid, let me know in the comments, and feel free to follow me on Twitter at JasonTheHeart, or follow the official channel account at OnPointMMA. Thanks for watching so much, and I'll catch you on the next video.